So not to fast forward to Africa, but when you're seeing foreigners pass you in air-conditioned SUVs, for instance, and they are deciding when they want to roll up their window and be closed off to the world, and when they want to roll it down and open their door and go engage with the world. Well, you don't have that luxury when you're on a bicycle. And I think not having that luxury and physically having to work to get just, 100 miles a day, which is basically just over an hour in the car. I think that locals respond to that and they say, you know what? You should come in. I want to give you a meal. I want to hear your story. I want to give you a place to stay tonight. And immersing into those far off cultures, that's, I guess, what I'm speaking about. Yeah.
Welcome to the Seek Travel Ride podcast, where we share the stories and experiences of people who have undertaken amazing adventures by bike. Whether it's crossing state borders, mountain ranges, countries or continents, we want to share that spirit of adventuring on two wheels with our listeners.
Hello, I'm your host, Bella Malloy, and I'm excited to introduce my guest for today's episode of Seek Travel Ride, McKenzie Barney. 29,000 kilometres. That's a distance required to cycle the world, and that is exactly what McKenzie has achieved. Her experiences have been collected across a number of cycle tours, undertaken as a mix of solo travel as well as with her partner. I'm keen to delve into McKenzie's stories deeper, to fully understand where an adventure so big first came into being, but also to learn about how the experiences she's had along the way have impacted her now, informing the adventurer that she is today. McKenzie, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me.
I am really, really excited for this conversation, McKenzie. I feel like it's a real gift for me to actually be able to spend some time with an adventurer like you and to just listen and absorb like a sponge about all these vast experiences that have no doubt come your way from the multitude of traveling that you have done. But a question which I like to ask all my guests to start the podcast is, do you remember the very first bike you ever rode?
Wow. I think, it's hard to pinpoint just one bicycle that I rode, but I've grown up on bikes, as kids, it's the first time you fly. It's a freedom vessel. And I think a bike is a very illustrative version of my childhood. I used it as transportation. I used it as time away from people. I used it to bike over to forts that I built. I think that a bike has been super special to me throughout my entire life. And I can't pinpoint just one, but I do remember the very first bike I took on this journey. And that is a whole story in of itself.
It is too, actually. Are we talking about, for my listeners, with the bike you took on this journey, are we talking about your first trip, which was part of this tour, which was in Vietnam?
You're exactly right. So it was actually not even a bike that I owned. It was a bike. I flew in with just the clothes on my back into Vietnam with this inkling that I wanted to start cycling and just see if it was something I liked, cycling long distances. So I ended up buying a used bike at a bike shop in Ho Chi Minh, Vietnam, asking them to throw some bags on it. And I put the little amount of gear, I think a toothbrush, maybe a camera, and just started to cycle north. So I do remember that bike, but I don't necessarily remember the bikes from my childhood or my first bike per se.
But you remember your first tour bike, and I love that. I also just love the simplicity of that, just a secondhand bike, threw a little bit of minimalist gear on and just headed north. I love that that's the mindset that you started such a big tour with. And I say such a big tour because, and we'll get into this, Vietnam, your first trip there, I think it was 22 days, which is not an insignificant amount of time. And for my listeners, whilst this was Mackenzie's first dabble into cycle touring or multi-day cycle touring in this way, Mackenzie, it certainly wasn't your first experience in terms of slow travel. In fact, you have done so much prior to your round the world cycle tour because you are a avid and very experienced thru-hiker, aren't you?
Yes, and for those that don't know, thru-hiking is a long-distance end-to-end trail. So it's a hiking trail, it's a footpath, and that can go anywhere from a week, 2 weeks, a month to multiple months. And I got into that after after college, really kind of searching for, I played soccer in college. I guess I'll back up to that. And that allowed me kind of this introspection through physical endurance and pushing the body. And I kind of craved that and missed that after college, jumping into filmmaking and the work world. I eventually was missing, I had this void in my life for, I guess, pushing the body to limits so that you can almost turn that part off and access mental, spiritual, other facets and layers of life through just moving meditation, if you will. And I got that from soccer and eventually found thru-hiking. So again, long distance, end-to-end trails. And I ended up, what I did is I Googled world's newest thru-hike. And it turns out it was in New Zealand. And I ordered in the trail book. Yes, those existed and still exist. And I ended up gathering a crew of like-minded friends with little to no experience of long distance hiking. And I was in the filmmaking world. So I ended up making a documentary film along the way and having sponsors. And this was right at the beginning of Instagram. So we kind of traded content for gear and had a funded trip and ended up through hiking New Zealand's Te Areroa, which is 1,500 kilometers. And that trip took 5 months. And I think the real important thing here was that I learned what 5 months in the wilderness can do to your soul, can do to a person. I mean, it completely changed me when I surfaced at the end of New Zealand. The trail goes from the top to the bottom. When I surfaced at the bottom in Bluff, I was a completely changed person. And so I became very addicted to these thru hikes in terms of just the reset I would get from them. And I ended up, I went from the Te Areroa to Nepal, where I did Everest Base Camp, and then over to the Greater Patagonian Trail, and then had another big, long, multi-month hike left in me. So I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail with my Kiwi partner, James. And after that, went over to Nepal for some more, Annapurna Circuit, Spiti Valley in the Indian Himalayas. I also did the John Muir Trail and the Colorado Trail, actually, when the pandemic hit. And after through hiking, long story short, I searched for the next evolution of human-powered travel, and I turned to the bicycle.
I spent the best part of Saturday and Sunday this past weekend sort of eyes wide open, mouth open, just I'm speechless to put it into words at what you have achieved, because with your through hikes, each one of those, and it's funny because you can say them so quickly, through the Himalayas, Pacific Crest Trail, John Muir Trail, the Colorado Trail, very quick to be said. But I mean, the Pacific Crest Trail, for example, that's a 6-month hike generally, isn't it? And it's not something that just falls off the tongue in a sentence and just happens in 3 weeks. These are life-changing moments and trails. And you were mentioning there with your first through hike there in New Zealand, and I came up across this, that for you, that was the pivotal before and after point in your life. You can reflect back on now and vividly say, that is when I changed to become the way I'm leading my life now.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's exactly it. I think that in life, you have these formulative experiences of before an event and after an event, a tipping point, if you will. And I think in so many ways, in so many facets, that's what the TA in New Zealand was for me, because I discovered this new way of moving through the world by my own self-propelled power, not relying on another machine, and also not relying on another human. And you have everything you need on your back. And something else that's so beautiful about these experiences, long distance, multi-month experiences by your own human power, is that you have to, whether you like it or not, strip away all of your forms of identity. So even your name on through hikes, you get what's called a trail name. So let's start with your name, your job. You're most likely quitting your job or leaving it. Your status, your country, your family and friends, basically everyone and everything that tells you who you are. You leave those behind and you go walk in the wilderness for multiple months. And what's beautiful about that is you start from ground zero. You are essentially nothing. You're going out and you're starting this brand new formative experience, and it's up to you how you put the building blocks on that ground zero and decide who you are and how you want to present yourself. And I think that that's why thru hiking and long distance cycling and human powered adventures can be so powerful in someone's life and be a before and after moment. And for me, it just propelled me into trying to search more for those experiences. Because like I said before, when you're doing moving meditation, it's kind of like yoga. Like I also travel a lot and I studied yoga. I'm a certified yoga teacher from an ashram in the yoga capital of the world in India. And one of the reasons why we do asanas is because when we quiet the mind, we can actually, when we quiet the body, we can actually tap into what's happening on a deeper level. And I think that has a lot of correlation with what these endurance long distance journeys are doing to us.
There's actually two things that, firstly, and I have to ask this, what is your trail name?
You know what's funny is I actually don't really have one. I say that, but I know I don't really have one. On the PCT, I didn't get one on the TA, and then on the PCT, we ended up going by just Jim and Mac, which is funny. You know, people would ask, well, what's your name? Just Jim and Mac. And there's a caliber to that too. I think like I do try to dare to think differently about everything and just kind of you're examining, well, why do we have these trail names? And I think they're beautiful and fun, and you can take on this new personality, but also, you know, you're coming home to yourself. So I have no qualms with still being called just Mac.
Oh, I love that. The second thing, it's funny, you know, we're talking about reflecting back and thinking about things, something that struck me with what you were describing about where someone generally is before they undertake a thru hike, and where they're at a point in life where they've decided to do something that's going to be all consuming for a matter of months. It reminded me actually of my old life back in corporate world Australia and facilitating sessions and talking about areas in terms of well-being. And there was a part from neuroscientists which talks about a principle called the SCARF model. And it talks about these 5 things which determine where a person fits on a well-being scale. I don't know if you've heard of it before, but it's called SCARF because the first letter, status, certainty, autonomy, relatedness, and fairness. And all those things interwoven determine certain things. It is just a theory, and I'm going on a tangent, and I will wrap it up because this is not a podcast about the SCARF model, but a lot of these things that relate to how we view ourselves and our own identity. And why I thought of that straight off from what you were saying is often people are coming on these big monumental trips because perhaps they're looking within about their identity and at a different junction. And it might be they've lost a job or they've left a job, they've found a new life partner, they've had some sort of tragic event. There's often upheaval, or perhaps there isn't, but they're searching for something. And it just reminded me just how you were describing that sort of event. And the fact that you can yourself reflect back now with such a sense of purpose on that first thru hike as well, which is quite interesting. There must have been experiences you took from all those thru hikes that you were able to put forward into the uncertainty of embarking in Vietnam without a bike to take on a cycle tour.
Absolutely. And I'm so fascinated by the SCARF model, and I'd love to just go back to that quickly because that really does, I think the psychology of a lot of this really matters and is important. And I think that's that coming to fruition moment of why am I out here? That's what you ask yourself day in and day out. And in reflection mode from why I got into thru hiking, I actually was, I'm a filmmaker, and I started a film production company with 2 of my best friends from college. And we were making a lot of travel, adventure, outdoor, and natural world wildlife films. And kind of jumped right into that right away after graduating from college. And what I found is that I love being a storyteller. However, I was quick to put a camera in front of my face and tell other people's stories, when I think the best storytellers know who they are and know what their story is. And what I found is that I had a void in not knowing what my story was quite yet. So I decided to put the camera down, step away from my film production career and go through hike and strip it all away to find out what my story was. And that was kind of my crux, if you will, of why I went into long distance voyages.
I think I recall reading somewhere how you were talking about purposefully selecting a heavy journal to take with you to write your thoughts about your experiences on one of these through hikes as well. It was an item that was, I guess, extra to necessary requirements for the trip. It wasn't going to give you the comfort of a waterproof tent or an extra -5 in a down sleeping bag on a cold winter's night or something, but it was purposefully selected because you wanted to be able to have the ability to journal your experience through this as well.
Absolutely, you're exactly right. So that was in Chile on the Greater Patagonian Trail. And I think the weight of an item, as every thru hiker and bicycle tourist knows, is very integral. You really count all the ounces of the weight of every item. And I chose an extra heavy journal so that I knew that the tangibly and intangibly, the weight of this item was very monumental for that journey. That trip, look, when I need answers in life, I tend to choose a long distance journey to take. And that trip was actually my first solo long distance journey. I hiked the Greater Patagonian Trail for 1 month, and I found out a lot about myself, what path I wanted to take. And that then spurred me from leaving film production for a little bit to travel the world and understand what my own story was. So in that, every day I would unpack what was in my backpack, and that journal would be right there. And I had to write in it. I had to go through the understanding, the reflection process, and the planning process for what kind of life I wanted to live after that trail. So I went into the wild by myself for the first time, and I came out with a lot of answers because of my journal. And I think it was Mary Oliver that said, pay attention, be astonished, tell about it. And that is a very important line for me, because I think that you can't get anywhere without paying attention and being astonished. And that really, there's a lot of science out about how being astonished and awe and wonder changes your brain chemistry. And now I'm in the stages of tell about it. And I think that's important too, because bringing a journal on a trip or writing or putting out photos and stories on this big bike trip, those are very important elements of the process that when you learn things, you need to share them.
I've actually just written that quote down. It's so beautiful. And I think about a lot of the conversations I've had with fellow guests, and I guess even perhaps conversations I've had with myself, just how much it resonates there. I recently took a trip, again, a very short trip, but a trip which I loved. I did it with my husband just a month or so ago and crossed the Pyrenees from the Atlantic Ocean, arriving over towards the Mediterranean. So it was the first trip where I've actually done something tangible, where it's actually crossed a whole mountain range. And it was also the first trip where I journaled. And so I took a book. It wasn't a heavy one though, but I did take a lot of stuff on that trip. It was definitely slow travel for many reasons. But it was the first time where I decided I'm going to write about my experiences each day, and I wrote them. I also recorded at the start of the day and at the end of the day. Maybe this is the internal podcaster, but I recorded voice memos about how things were going because I want to be able to reflect back on that. I'm interested, McKenzie, do you keep a journal now for all of your trips?
I do, every single one religiously.
And do you ever, when you're not traveling, do you ever go back and just pick up a journal from a trip and just flick to a random page and just read an excerpt?
Absolutely. That is completely part of my reflection process. And I would hope one day I can take all those probably hundreds of journals now and compile them into some sort of book, maybe a memoir. And I'm actually, not to jump too far ahead, but I am actually in the editing process of a film of this cycle trip. And going through those journals puts me right back into my frame of mind, where I was on that day and what I was thinking. And it's not so much the what that happened, it's the why, it's the deeper inner revolution, if you will. It's the introspective journey. I mean, like, I always say I went out into the world to seek something when in reality it was an inner journey. It's this beautiful parallel that can happen. And journals for me are that insight into what was occurring in each of those trips.
And so then if we transition then across to from your through hiking days, and we'll start talking now about your experience on this cycling trip. I had a quote that you'd written for yourself, and maybe it was even in that journal. I'm not sure which hike this may have been on, but it's something I picked up, and it's simple really. It's time to experience the world and do it now. So to me, that was something came across to you during one of these hikes where it was like, I want to go around the world. And I don't know whether from that quote that you knew you were going to discover it on a bicycle, or whether the thought to travel the world on a bicycle came later. But you did set off. Your first country here was Vietnam, and you didn't even have a bike. Did you consider bringing your own bike? And I even want to know, what was the reasoning behind getting to Vietnam and buying the bike there?
Okay, so people always ask, well, where can I start? How do I even start something like this? And I always tell them about Vietnam, because it was just often an inkling of wanting that next evolution of human-powered travel. And I also wanted a speed at which I could see the world, but not have it take, 10 years if you were going to thru-hike the world, for instance, or thru-hike multiple continents. And I have a lot of admiration for people who do that. But I knew that I wanted to progress up to the next speed. So I think I was traveling in Thailand post-PCT, post-Pacific Crest Trail, and I came across a Cycle Vietnam book, or Cycle Southeast Asia. It was like a Lonely Planet book. I picked it up and I was hooked. It was as if I was given a sign that this was next. So I bought the book. I started to just read the book, not even getting on the internet, and said, this is simply what I need to do next. And at the time, I said my partner's from New Zealand, so we were in Christchurch, I believe. And I said, okay, I can fly from here to Vietnam and just start cycling. At that time, I had no idea I wanted to cycle the world. I just knew I wanted to explore a new mode of transportation. And I wanted to earn it. That was the other thing. I really wanted to earn the miles, earn the experiences. And what I found is I also earned the respect of locals. And I think that was really key to my experiences. You're going off the beaten track where a lot of locals who see you on a bike, they haven't seen a foreigner come into that area without a bus or an air-conditioned vehicle, and especially not sweating and towing everything they need on a bicycle. So that really allowed me to immerse into the culture. And I think that in terms of the vision of this project, I finished Vietnam. I cycled from Ho Chi Minh to Hanoi in 22 days. And I was so proud of my effort, but also felt like I was on to something. But I was also in a slow travel, just slow travel mode in general. I wanted to explore bike packing, but I also wanted to explore organic farming and permaculture. I also wanted to get into yoga. And so I kind of checked all those boxes. And then I said, well, wait, maybe I was really onto something with the biking thing. Maybe I should revisit that. So that's, I guess, how the beginning went.
When you say you wanted to earn the experience, what specifically are you calling out there? Did you feel you hadn't earned experiences before?
I think that when I talk about earning it, it's really the sense of accomplishment, of course, the physical endorphins and endurance accomplishment that you're getting. But in essence, I'm talking about earning that cultural experience. So not to fast forward to Africa, but when you're seeing foreigners pass you in air-conditioned SUVs, for instance, and they are deciding when they want to roll up their window and be closed off to the world, and when they want to roll it down and open their door and go engage with the world. Well, you don't have that luxury when you're on a bicycle. And I think not having that luxury and physically having to work to get just, 100 miles a day, which is basically just over an hour in the car, I think that locals respond to that and they say, you know what? You should come in. I want to give you a meal. I want to hear your story. I want to give you a place to stay tonight. And immersing into those far off cultures. That's, I guess, what I'm speaking about. Yeah.
It's like you've walked through a door where vulnerability is there for you. And so allowing yourself to be vulnerable, to have those raw experiences as well. You were talking there about, being invited by people. Be my guest, let me host you. I want to hear your story. I imagine then also that you get an insight into hearing their stories as well.
Absolutely. I can think of multiple occurrences. Homestays in Vietnam was the first one. Actually, you know what? A side note on this too is that I did a lot of this world cycle journey solo. And that was an intentional choice. And I found that, so I did Africa with my partner, James. I found that when I did Europe, Vietnam, South America solo, as a female, I was actually invited in a lot more, taken care of a lot more, looked after a lot more. And that surprises a lot of people because they say on these solo journeys, aren't you afraid? Aren't you fearful? Aren't you vulnerable? But I actually found the flip side of that to be true.
Because people perceive you as more vulnerable, so in a way they're potentially looking out for you more, whereas if you're with a team of two in a couple sort of format, they figure, well, you're all right, someone's with you, you'll work it out.
Absolutely.
And I guess also that opens you up to different experiences as well, because it is a question that I had in mind. And you do talk about, Cairo to Cape Town, you did do that with your partner. And what an experience to have with your partner as well, I might just add. Just absolutely mind-blowing you'll forever look at a world map and, you'll look at a world map and think lots of different things. But do you ever actually now, having done that part of your trip with someone else and having done so many vast parts of it on your own, do you ever reflect back and think, I wouldn't mind going back there on my own as well as a comparison?
That's a great question. I actually wouldn't change one bit of my trip. I was so grateful to have done Africa with my partner. And actually, the backstory on that is before I even knew I wanted to cycle the world, my big vision was to cycle Africa. And a lot of this was prelude to Africa. And then once James and I completed Africa, that's when I said, well, I'm over halfway to 29,000 kilometers. Why don't I just continue? I think that Africa is absolutely something that you could do alone as a solo female, but I craved sharing that experience. And I'm so glad that I did. My partner, James, actually, he has a book coming out later this year about our Africa journey. So you can find out a lot more in that and his perspective on it. Because, right, so in a cycle journey, when you're with someone, you're not side by side. You're one in front of the other in your own world. So his perspective on that Africa journey is drastically different than mine. Yes, you have someone to share experiences with when you stop and you're off the bike. But when you're on the bike, you're very much still in your own world. So I tell a lot of people that traveling with a partner is a beautiful experience. And I wouldn't say traveling with a partner or traveling solo is better than the other. I think they're drastically different and they are worth experiencing both. So I'm grateful that on this world cycle journey, I was able to experience both.
No, I could definitely appreciate that. Again, none of my cycle tours have been as vast as what you have undertaken. But I have had the benefit of doing trips away on my own and also trips with my husband, and they are different. You do approach them differently. There is a different level of vulnerability as well when you are on your own because you have to figure it all out. We do live in an age where, depending where we are and which country we're in, we can phone support. But, you still have to be the one that does that, whereas, if you're with somebody else, it's also the safety net. Safety net might not be the right word, but it's also the reassurance that someone's with you. But if you're having a low moment, you've got someone straight away who can bring you up, or vice versa as well. It is interesting. And if you were both writing different books, it would be interesting having a look at different journal entries for a day side by side and seeing what one person thought compared to the other. I love that notion that you're there together, but you're experiencing it differently regardless.
Absolutely. And you are so spot on with your experiences with if someone's having a low day, you can have a high day and bring them up. That could not be more true. And that's a huge advantage that we found in Africa of cycling together. But also you could flip that and say that it's a disadvantage because when you're cycling solo, like how I just was recently in South America, if I'm having a great day, I can push on for more hours and not kind of be weighed down by someone else's thoughts, feelings, anything like that, and vice versa. When I'm not having a great day, I can decide to take a rest day and not feel like I'm affecting someone else's experience. And I would be so curious for you too, like when it comes to like mechanicals or being completely self-reliant and self-sufficient, like how do people respond to you when you're out there by yourself as a female?
Well, this is a very random event that has occurred just a few hours ago, but it's something that I'm just thinking of straight away. I went for a ride at lunchtime today and I passed two cyclists on the road and I could see they were, I assumed they were a couple, and the female was in tears. I couldn't tell what was wrong, but I thought maybe they've had a mechanical. And as I passed in French, I said, ça va? Is everything okay? And they were like, yeah, we're both okay. And I kept going on. I thought, okay, maybe they've got a mechanical or who knows what's going on, but I checked. I wasn't feeling it for a longer ride, so I just turned around and went home. And to put it in perspective, it was going to just be an hour's ride. On my way back at that very spot, the female cyclist that I had passed was there and on her own. And she'd had her cycle jersey off and I sort of stopped and I was like, ça va? And I could see she'd actually crashed and she was bleeding and everything was hurt and stuff. And I ended up staying with her. She's Spanish, couldn't speak much French, couldn't speak much English. I don't speak much Spanish, but between us, funnily enough, we could figure out stuff. Her partner who was with her had gone to the nearest place to try and find out how to get an ambulance to her. And I had said then, are you okay? And it was then that she just not allowed herself to be vulnerable, but sort of I felt more likely to actually insist that I find out what's wrong and actually stayed with her as opposed to cycle on because she's with someone else. So that to me is such a fresh experience that just happened. And look, just for everyone out there, don't be concerned. Unfortunately, she's likely broken her collarbone, but I waited about 45 minutes. The ambulance turned up and she's in good medical care now. But it is such a present front of mind example of how being on your own or being with someone else changes the perspective of a passing traveler as well. Like I stopped because she was on her own. I didn't stop when there were two people there, even though they said, oh no, everything's okay. So yeah, interesting.
And that's so key. That's exactly what I'm saying with people who, South America is very fresh in my mind too. It's like, the women who are feeding me lunch and they're like, please stay here. Please stay here. I want to take care of you. It's that passing traveler. It's the person who really cares because you're solo and they want to make sure you're okay because you feel like you have a responsibility in a way.
Wow. To my listeners, I feel with our chat today with McKenzie that we are going to be skipping around from continent to continent. And I feel it's impossible that I could do a podcast that goes through every detail of this 29,000 kilometre journey. So just come along for the ride and come along for the questions that fall out of it. But when I track back a bit, McKenzie, to what you were saying, and that, cycling the world wasn't what you had in mind necessarily when you got to Vietnam. But you did have Cairo to Cape Town in your mind. So Vietnam was what you labelled as your litmus test, as in, would I like it enough to keep cycling or would I hate cycle touring and then go back maybe to thru-hiking? I'm not sure. From the litmus test, you did then what you decided would be the training, which was actually your longer tour, which was through Europe. So Istanbul to, I think you went through to the Netherlands.
I did, yes.
Now, what were the key changes you made from that first 22 days in Vietnam to, I guess, cycling across Europe?
Oh, in essence, I got more serious about the goal. So the goal at the time was Africa. And like you said, Vietnam litmus test. Loved it, but ended up selling that bike at the end of it because it was just a used mountain bike to get me through that journey. And then when I decided that this was actually after the pandemic. So the pandemic happened in between Vietnam and Europe. And as everyone knows, that just made us all reassess our values, but also what we wanted in life. And for me, the top of that list was cycling Africa. So I got to planning and I said, you know what? I need to do some sort of training ride for Africa that will make it again so that I earn it, or so that I feel prepared, so that I feel like this is something that I can accomplish in Africa. And I decided to start from basically the bridge of Asia and Europe in Turkey and ride through 11 countries all the way up to the Netherlands. And what I did is I didn't really announce that route, because I did this actually on all of my rides of this journey. I wanted to let the route organically happen. If a local said in Northern Macedonia, take this route, not this one, this one's going to be busy with cars, take this beautiful route through the mountains. I wanted to be able to change on the fly. So for instance, originally I thought I might go through the Italian Alps. Well, I didn't end up going that way. I went through Austria. So basically I took 6 weeks by myself to travel from Turkey to the Netherlands. And what changed tangibly on this route is that I became more serious with becoming a bicycle tourist. So I bought another used bike, but I bought a used Surly disc trucker.
Yay, another Surly. Sorry, I have a soft spot for Surleys. My husband has a Surly. We love Surly in this household.
Love Surly. It was a great first bike for this journey. I did end up moving on to a Kona Sutra LTD, which I'll get into later. But the Surly disc trucker was a great steel steed, and as everyone knows, is a rugged bike that can handle a world tour. And this was a 2015 used one, and it still performed fantastically. So I put a back rack and some rear panniers and tried to stick to as minimalist of a setup as I could. And on that ride, I decided to do it solo because James and I had the plan to do Africa together. And I think that goes on the foundation of our relationship a bit, but I feel like you have to come to a relationship very kind of confident in your own skin and independent, and then you can be two independents together and be a very, very strong couple together. So in that theme of how we try to approach things, I said, why don't you go do your traveling before Africa, and I'm going to make sure that I know how to fix a mechanical by myself. I know how to route plan by myself. I know how to enjoy bike packing by myself before we start the Africa journey together. And that's exactly what happened. I ended up learning a lot on that trip, and I felt very confident before we started at the pyramids in Egypt. The reason for a lot of these journeys is self-sufficiency. And yes, you can go with a partner. Yes, you can go with a group. But at the end of the day, you have to feel like if something were to happen, you are reliant on yourself, on your gear, on your knowledge, on your preparation. And I think that allows you to get the most from the journey when you have that independent confidence within a group, right? I think that allows you to then be cycling with someone and still be making gains in your own mind, not necessarily just within your group mindset and your group think, right? It's more of an individual experience within a group, or an individual experience alongside your partner. And that allows for you to tap into different modes of what the experience is all about.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hi everyone, it's me, Bella from the show. I just wanted to let you know about something exciting. I have recently just created a new Facebook group named Seek Travel Ride, where if you are a fan of the show, you can join and we can actually bring this community more to life. It's a place where you can learn more about our guests, see more photos, chat about episodes in more detail, and maybe even pose some questions as well. It's also a place where you can share your own bicycle adventure journeys. Whether you've got a photo or a blog or some videos that you want to share, come online, say hi, join the Facebook group, and let's enjoy this community that we have built. We have a global audience here. People are listening from all around the world, and I think we can only thrive and get an even greater sense of wanderlust by sharing our experiences with each other and connecting. So get onto Facebook. I've provided a link in the show notes and you can join that community as well. Thank you. Now back to the show. So then if we take a step back and talk about putting yourself in a position where you're confident to problem solve on a tour, if I was to ask you then to reflect on a time where things didn't go well for you on part of your solo trip. It doesn't matter whether it's South America, Australia, New Zealand, Vietnam, or through Europe. But I do want it to be a time when you were on your own. What's one of the things that did happen that you had to problem solve, and take me to that moment of how you worked your way through it?
Yeah, this is a great question, because the first one that really comes to mind, I was alongside James. It was when we hit a military coup in Sudan, or rebel groups taking over the roads in Ethiopia, and had to decide how to get around that. So the first ones that come to mind are situations that do comment on the fragility of maybe politics in Africa, or a wildlife situation in Africa when we were charged by an African male elephant in heat. Both of those were alongside James. But, luckily, when I was alone through, Vietnam, all through Europe, across Australia, down the South Island of New Zealand, and recently in South America, all those solo trips, I really didn't have too many hair-raising, gnarly moments that were to fight or flight. And I think that was a bit of luck, but also preparation and making sure that I didn't put myself in sketchy, for lack of better words, situations as a solo female, doing a lot of research ahead of time. I can think of a number of mechanicals. So those would probably be what stick out the most. My first flat tire in, I believe it was Montenegro, Europe, where I really had no idea what I was doing. And it was the rear tire, of course. It always is the rear tire.
Always the rear tire.
It is. And as everyone knows, every cycle tourist knows, that's the worst, because there's the most, it takes like double as much time to fix. Yeah, I think a lot of mechanicals really stand out. I got heat exhaustion a number of times in Australia, cycling across that country in the summer.
That is no joke. Like, heat exhaustion is really serious from a health point of view as well. You did your Australia tour through the height of summer, from my recollection. And knowing where you were going, it's not like you could just go, well, it's a hot day today. It was a hot month, wasn't it?
It absolutely was. And I think that nature threw everything at me. And that was probably intentional, with going to both hemispheres, as well as, cycling across Australia in the heat of the summer. That was a timing decision on my part. And I also really wanted to test myself endurance-wise in the heat, literally the heat of the elements. But I went from Australia to the winter in Bolivia. And that was a huge juxtaposition. And, I went from sea level to, let's see, are we talking feet or meters? I think in feet, 15,000 feet elevation. That was my normal day, my normal mountain passes, to, below freezing temperatures. Yeah.
That's almost 5,000 meters. Like, it's funny. Feet sound so much more impressive when we're talking about elevation, and kilometers are so much more impressive than miles. So I'm happy to switch between the two, but I have a full appreciation, because when you're talking about going from the extreme of the summer in Australia to the winter in Bolivia, the first thing that came to mind was, my gosh, but you're also doing this with elevation. Like, there's not many places in the world where you're going to be higher than anywhere that you are in Bolivia on a road.
Exactly. That was, yeah.
Unless we're talking, into the Himalayas then, and then you're not there on a bike.
You're exactly right. And actually, that's a funny side note. So from Australia, I actually flew to the Himalayas for a little bit of hiking. It helped me in the acclimatization process, and also in the reset mindset process before South America. And I went to South America, and I actually intended to start from Ecuador and bike south and see how far south I could get. But then I quickly realized that obviously in the other hemisphere, the seasons were flipped, and I needed to start south and make my way north. So I started in Bolivia, and below freezing temperatures. The salt flats were 3,800 meters. That's what I started at. I really had to allow myself some very low mileage cycling days to acclimatize. And I would say even by the end, 3 months later, when I ended in Colombia and went through Peru and Ecuador, which were very high in the Andes, I would say at the end, you're acclimatized by all means, but you're still not able to get the mileage that you want because of that high elevation.
Yeah, it's very different. Like, just because you're acclimatized doesn't mean that you can do what you did at sea level regardless.
Altitude really affected me though, in the sense of, when you wake up, your heart is racing because your body's just working harder for everything, to breathe, to sleep, etc. So the altitude was no joke. I definitely had to take it seriously in the Andes, especially after cycling sea level in Australia. But before Australia, sorry, I'm jumping around so much. Before Australia, I did have some mountain experience in New Zealand. When I was in Australia, I thought to myself, okay, I have about 6,000 kilometers left to finish up this 29,000 kilometer goal. Where do I want to go? Do I want to do a North America? Do I want to do a South America? And every bike packer and bicycle tourist knows those images from the Andes in like Peru and Ecuador and Bolivia. And you're just like, they're so dreamy that I felt like I had to do it. I had to have that be the grand finale.
And when we're talking about images, we're talking about salt flat deserts, the Salar de Uyuni. I never know if I'm pronouncing that correct, by the way.
No, you did great. Yep.
There we go. I won't say it again just in case I get it wrong. But we're talking about the salt deserts. You've got obviously Machu Picchu, which goes without saying. It definitely is an icon. But we're talking about high mountains and high lakes. And then, volcanoes. It is just, dreamy is the right word. Like, sometimes you look at the photos and you think, is there a green room behind you? Like, it is just like, whoa. Did you find yourself saying that out loud? You'd get to a stage and go, whoa.
Pretty much every day I was awestruck. And I've actually been doing some research into awe and kind of how it does alter your brain chemistry a bit, and how it is a launching point to appreciation and wonder, and what that can do for the chemistry of your thoughts and just your energy as a whole. And I think that South America did that for me. But yeah, I was completely solo on that trip, and that was very intentional. My final 3 months of this colossal ambition and goal that I set, I felt like I owed it to myself to dive back into the same thought process that we were talking about in the beginning, the Chile Greater Patagonian Trail thought process, which that was actually about 5 years ago. And that's again where I brought the heavy journal, because I had a lot of self-introspection and self-discovery to do about where I wanted to go in life. Well, I felt like I was back in South America again, and I was finishing up another huge goal, and I really owed it to myself to be completely alone in a foreign language environment. And yes, I met a lot of other cycle tourists, but I was by myself. So when I said those wows every day, it was very loud, and it was very, it's only me to hear that kind of wow, like I am taking my hat off and applauding nature. These vistas, the world's largest salt flats in Bolivia, to the Peru Great Divide, one of the world's, if not the most beautiful dirt touring route you can do on a bicycle in the world. And I would say it's absolutely up there, super remote, to then continuing down the canyon in Peru and up the coast and into Ecuador along the Ring of Fire, into Chimborazo Volcano National Park and Cotopaxi National Park. And then finishing in Colombia's coffee region. And obviously this is all still very fresh in my mind because it was the grand finale. I just completed it. But South America did wonders into these chapters, if you will, of my journey. I think that South America really helped me cement the cycling journey being done, and allowing me to be content because of everything that I experienced there.
Like I said, I feel like I'm just a little kid of joy here, just listening to you recount those tales, and just recount what it was like living through that experience and being in those places and appreciating your surroundings for every moment. Yeah, wow. Like, I don't even have a question to follow that up with. It's just wow.
No, and it's just wow. And I think that's what it's all about, right? Like, I think that again, let's revisit, the great Mary Oliver. It's pay attention, like really understand how to pay attention. You need to get quiet. Sometimes, most of the times, you need to be alone. Nature does it for us. You need to be in nature. You need to be paying attention, focusing, listening. Open up your ears, your eyes, and really listen to what's going on around you. and then be astonished. So allow yourself the space to be astonished. What does that mean? That means really fixating on feelings or elements or nature or something that gives you awe, that gives you wonder, that puts you in a unfamiliar situation of, what is this? I have never experienced this before. This in front of me is something that I'm trying to translate in the language of my brain of what is this experience, and then tell about it. And that's the phase I'm in now. It's like I have to look back at paying attention and being astonished and kind of decode this whole journey and say, well, if I do want to tell about it in a film, in a book, in writing, then what do I have to tell, and why is it important?
And I imagine, McKenzie, it would be one of those things if we were to talk about different emotions. When people say, you might have played at a game as a kid, put on happy face, scared faced, excited, angry, and you change your facial expression for that. If we were to do something like that, and I was to say, recount a time where you felt might have been the most happy, the most vulnerable, the most awe-inspired, angry. If you were to pull your trip away just with emotions, you would have so many different stories to tell for each of those as well. Which is quite interesting. Now, you did obviously mention, and I did specifically call out an experience for when you were on your own, but you did talk about some, hair-raising would probably be not the best way to describe them. In fact, I can't even put myself in your shoes in terms of vulnerability, but being back in Africa, in Sudan, military coup underway, I can't imagine what that's like. How did that all unfold for you? Was it on the horizon at all when you entered Sudan? Take me back to that time.
So Sudan had been going through, and we all know the current state of things in Sudan. It's absolutely devastating to talk about, but this was back, in 2021. Sudan had been going through a number of protests, and it was absolutely normal to keep your hand on the pulse of what was happening in Sudan, particularly in Khartoum, the capital, as you approached the capital. So we were keeping our hand on the pulse. And I'm sure this is actually a great resource to mention for people going on a bicycle tour in foreign countries and continents. There are usually WhatsApp groups that you can join. So we were on the Cairo to Cape Town cycling WhatsApp group, and we had been invited to that, and we were able to then stay in touch with other cyclists. So through that WhatsApp group, we kept our hand on the pulse of what was going on and knew that things were getting worse, but we continued towards Khartoum through the Saharan desert. And we had SIM cards in our phone, and it was actually my partner James's birthday. And on his birthday, we tried to call his family, and we said, "Oh wow, we don't have any service. This is weird." And there's no Wi-Fi out there. So we just thought, odd, but not going to overthink it, going to get on our bikes and keep going. We stopped for lunch, which was some very sugary black tea, and some ful, which is a lot of oil and a lot of beans and a lot of bread. And so we stopped for lunch, and we see everyone crowded around this TV. Well, it ended up, it was the leader of the military who had taken over. I believe they had kidnapped the president, if I'm not mistaken, and the military had taken over. And this was actually the one television channel that was being broadcast in Sudan at the time, because they cut off all phone communication, which meant no Wi-Fi, no communication to the outside world. And the only thing you could watch was that one television channel. So we were in a bit of a bind. We decided to continue towards Khartoum because locals actually told us that we would be safe as travelers, and that's kind of their customs there. They make sure that they really do treat travelers well and kind of put them first, and that's that culture. And side note, Sudanese locals are probably the most friendly locals that I have ever encountered around the entire world. So we trusted them. We went towards Khartoum. Turns out that we luckily chose a non-protest day to cycle into Khartoum, the city capital. And I have never been in a more eerie capital. All the businesses were closed. There was no one out in the streets. And thankfully, it was not a protest that day, but it was in between two protests. So we had to find a hotel and find it fast. And we just went knocking, found a hotel, were let in. And we had then found out not so long after that the airport was closed, that no transportation was running. Basically, there was no way out. And the military coup was a very uncertain situation. Luckily for us, the matters actually got better within about a week. And yeah, within that week, we had no idea when power would be on. We had power outages multiple times. There were only a few corner stores, if you will, open to get food, and water was still running. This actually wasn't that bad compared to the situation of Sudan right now and what they're going through right now. It's a lot worse. But we then were able to go to the airport. We had to fly, unfortunately, because the Tigray War in the north of Ethiopia was going on. So that land border was closed. So we had to box up our bikes quickly, get on a flight, hope that flight would go, and it did. And we landed in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, and we were able to get out of Sudan during the military coup. But that was definitely the most uncertain situation, and also the situation that opened our eyes to the fragility of politics and how something can turn so fast, like as in a matter of a day in Africa.
As an Australian, and I live in France, I can't imagine that type of upheaval that overtakes a whole nation. And I can't imagine what that week, like you said, it's out of your control, but everything is uncertain. And I can't imagine just sitting with that uncertainty for a week, what type of thoughts would be running through my mind. Did you actually get to a point of questioning your whole remainder of that trip at that point? And did you at any stage maybe even consider saying, you know what, this isn't worth pursuing?
Yeah, it was very hard for me because I had this vision of cycling Cairo to Cape Town. That's the entire continent. That's 11,000 kilometers. We had scheduled 6 to 8 months to accomplish this. And it was a lesson for me in control the controllables and let what you cannot control out. Just it is what it is, and don't worry about it. Thankfully, I was with my partner, James, who has a different perspective on it. He was like, you know what? What's the worst case scenario? We have to stay in Sudan. We open up a tea shop. That was our joke. We open up a tea shop in Sudan. That's the worst case scenario. And I love that because he grounds me in times where I'm up in the clouds, like, we have to do this massive trip. We have to cycle all of Africa. We have to get going. We can't be stuck here. And he's like, you know what? People are going through a lot worse things right now. And we need to be conscious of that. And also, what's the worst thing that can happen for us? We're being taken care of by the locals. We have running water. We have power. These are a lot of things that, sadly, fast forward to this year, and that's not the case for a lot of the Sudanese. And I know a cyclist who got caught up in a lot worse of a situation. So all perspective speaking, I think that we were very lucky to get out of that situation. And it's funny because going from one fragile situation to the next, then we had Ethiopia to worry about. And the debate with that was, do you cycle Ethiopia when there's a war being waged in the north? And unfortunately, we couldn't cycle a lot of Ethiopia because the rebels took over the roads in the south. I had this learning moment of Sudan and Ethiopia where I said, you know what, I have this goal, I have this dream, but I also need to be okay with the uncertainty that comes along with it.
Again, it is. It's just things that are out of control and being uncertain. We were speaking earlier about the benefits of being with someone on a trip, because when you're having a low moment, they can raise you up. It's slightly different, but exactly the same, in that your partner there was able to help. Well, I don't know that grounding is the right word, but he was able to provide some reassurance of actually, let's just be calm, and provided some calmness in those moments where perhaps it could have been very much a different thought process running through your mind. So that is really, really fortunate. I can imagine what it was like for you wrestling with that thought. Cairo to Cape Town is your big dream. You've thought about this. It's been protracted and drawn out because of COVID as well. Having to, I guess, settle with and accept a change because of circumstances. I imagine that took some time to get to as well, that no, you're not cycling through all of Sudan, and actually no, Ethiopia is going to be off limits. It's, you have to make those rational, safe decisions as well.
You do, and that comes with the territory of a lot of this cycling is on road with a lot of cars, maybe not a good shoulder. It comes with the realization that in the middle of this, the pandemic happened, and there are certain countries or continents I wanted to go to that I couldn't. It's a complete lesson in you're not in control, no matter how much you think you are. I felt cliche, but thanked my lucky stars that we made it to Cape Town, that, it was a 5-month journey that could have taken a lot longer, that we were safe, that nothing really that bad happened along the way. And I really thanked Africa for the incredible experience. And it was after Africa where I said, okay, that's it. Like, I'm done with cycling. That was my big dream, cycling Africa. Everything was leading up to that. And something within me said, I think you're just getting started. I think Africa was culturally the most rich experience I have ever had in my 33 years of life on this planet. I owe so much to Africa, and it really opened up my eyes and my perspective on the world and beautiful cultures and beautiful people and beautiful natural wilderness in this world. But I also think it was just the beginning, or if you numerically want to speak, it was about halfway, a little over halfway of my cycling journey. There was so much left I had in the tank in terms of things that I wanted to experience. And I feel like Africa opened up that Pandora's box for me of wanting to start to explore more faraway corners of our planet.
I also think it's testament to the way that you experienced Africa or traveled Africa that those experiences happened. I think I came across an excerpt where you said there was a point in time where you both did away with your equipment for cooking intentionally, because that would then put you in situations where you're interacting with locals daily on a basis. So you're not self-sufficient from how you're getting your meals. So consciously making that decision meant that the experiences that came to you in Africa were vastly different from what they could have been. I feel there's elements of African culture you would experience whether you cooked a meal or not. But I love that you took that intentionality with that decision as well.
Absolutely. And we're no strangers to what's called cold soaking. And I think it's a big thing in the biking community, but it's definitely big in through hiking. It's where you ditch your stove and all the components that come with stove cooking hot food. So, your stove, your pot, all of your cooking materials. When you ditch those, you actually save a lot of weight and a lot of space. So we're no strangers to cold soaking, meaning basically you put in coffee or oats or noodles into a jar and you let it puff up with just cold water. It's not glorious at all. It's not the most nutritious or the most satisfying by any means, but it does get you by. It gets you through. So in Africa, we were debating bringing an international stove to be able to cook. And we said, you know what, let's just start in Egypt and let's see if we feel the need for a stove, if we're really that remote and we're really cooking that much. Turns out, like you said, we found that it was actually a huge opportunity to ditch the stove and to instead rely on finding at least one, if not 2 meals a day with locals at local restaurants, cafes. And that's kind of a trick with traveling that a lot of slow travel vagabonders kind of know is eat with the locals, do as the locals do. This is a motto, this is a manifesto, if you will, of how to immerse yourself into a local culture and you speak with locals, you get to know the local prices, you get to taste all the local cuisine and interact with them. And they feel like, you're really trying to be just one of them. So we found that was a great way to integrate into the culture.
Sometimes it sounds impossible. And I know people who quite rightly say that they don't like the idea that they would give advice to anyone, that everyone should experience their experiences totally individually and for themselves. But if you were seeking out some advice, if someone said, McKenzie, I want to take a trip myself, what little nugget of advice would you give me for my trip that you've learnt to take on board? What sort of thing do you think you would say to them?
So are we speaking like a human-powered endeavor, specifically cycling, hiking, traveling?
Human-powered endeavor. It could be, I'm thinking cycling, but it could be through hiking as well. And maybe your answer to those would be different. So maybe we should just call it out as cycle touring then.
Just cycle touring. Okay. On this note of trying to immerse with locals, I would say be very open-minded and ready to change your route at any time, depending on what you hear from locals. So that could be safety concern. That could be like, hey, there are actually bandits up ahead. Be very careful. or don't camp, or make sure to stay in a guest house or a homestay, or completely reroute and go a different way. It could also be, oh my gosh, you've never heard of this amazing waterfall. You've never heard of this incredible restaurant you have to try. Be very open planned with your route planning. I think that is such a huge takeaway that I've found on my world cycle, is to listen to the locals and be ready to change your plans for what they suggest.
I love that. Allow yourself the flexibility in your itinerary to experience truly the places that you're there with the people that are best there to show you them as well. That's awesome. And the idea of the cold soaking too. Although I do know you did allow, well, I don't know that it's allowing yourself. I guess you had the presence of mind to know that the areas you were going to go to in South America and the altitudes you were going to meant that the idea of having a hot meal would have an extra layer of importance to you, because you did obviously cook in South America too, but that was a conscious decision too, moving away from cold soaking back to this is some form of comfort I'm going to need.
Absolutely. I think that when it comes to cold environments, I'm the first one to grab that stove and grab all that extra equipment. That being said, I did bring a stove that wasn't entirely compatible with, I couldn't find my isopropane, I believe it's called, gas in Bolivia. So I did cold soak in Bolivia. And it really does make you, it demands that you interact with locals and local food and local cuisine. So in Bolivia, I actually had no problem with, of course, I'd have, a cold coffee when it's below freezing temperatures, and that was awful. But then it makes you think, okay, I need to get to a small restaurant to have some sort of pollo con arroz, chicken and rice for dinner, or try that new street cart cuisine that I've just been looking at. But if I had only relied on bringing my own food and cooking my own food, I probably wouldn't try it and risk it. But I do think, yes, in South America, when I had the opportunity to get that correct gas and use my stove, it ended up being a luxury. That's what you find, these little luxuries in different things. It might be going to a guest house the first time in a week and you get a hot shower and you really appreciate running water. It might be sleeping in a nice bed after sleeping on the ground for 5 days straight. It might be getting to go to, I think in Cusco, I got to go to like a steam room sauna, when I hadn't actually been warm and not been wearing 4 jackets, no joke, 4 jackets in the mountains of Peru. So it's those little luxuries that you appreciate so much, and you realize, it's cliche about how much Western civilization, we have it so good.
Definitely. And actually, I want to ask this question. You were talking there about literally wearing 4 jackets. Other than layers, is there any other sort of technique that you came across for dealing with cold temperatures as well?
Great question. I really do think that we were just talking about the stove, but being able to warm up your hands in the morning or at night is so huge. And then you have the possibility, if there's any risk of hypothermia, that you can put hot water into a water bottle and put that in your sleeping bag. And that can honestly save your life in a lot of instances. So I do think a stove and layers are the 2 big, don't miss those opportunities if you're doing some cold weather cycling. Also, just constant weather checking. It's annoying, but it will again save your life. There were multiple weather windows I actually had to wait out in the very remote mountains of the Peru Great Divide. And I didn't want to risk, I'm alone, so I don't have someone else with me for body heat. It's a serious matter when you're alone going into remote mountains where you don't see another human for 3 days. And it's below freezing temps that could be snowing. Because when you get cold, it's such a task to get warm again. So for instance, something that I always really worry about is cold rain or snow. So what do you do in that situation? Do you keep riding and you try and ride yourself to increased body warmth, but then you risk potentially losing feeling in your hands, your toes, your limbs? You could get hypothermia that way if you don't dry off, aka if it doesn't stop raining or snowing. Or do you take the very conservative, safe approach of stopping right there and putting up your tent before it's really downpouring or really snowing? And these are the kind of like minute situations that you have to scramble and try and assess. Okay, well, wait, did the weather report say that it was going to snow all day, or should I keep going for 2 hours because I know it might stop? What are the clouds saying? What is the dip in temperature saying? And you only have yourself to rely on. So it is completely your fault if you make the wrong decision. And that can be life-threatening. Hypothermia is absolutely no joke. Yeah, I just think that in Africa, I had someone to throw ideas off of in sketchy situations. But in 4 other continents, it was only me. And yes, I made a lot of mistakes, but at the end of the day, you can only blame yourself if something goes wrong.
Conversely, the experiences you've had, one of the overwhelming benefits there is that you learn to trust yourself.
You absolutely do. And that's one of the biggest takeaways of this journey for me. I do think that I've been doing a lot of reflecting on being a female who did this solo journey alone. And I do think that, females in general, we tend to be caregivers. We tend to give a lot of ourselves to others. And I think it was a beautiful opportunity to give myself some time, some thought, some thinking time, some introspective time on this journey. You blatantly have to become best friends with yourself on a solo journey that lasts multiple years on a bicycle. And that is throwing ideas, off of yourself, having a lot of internal dialogue. But yes, like you just said, it's a lot of decisions that you have to trust yourself. You have to believe in yourself. There's no one else around. If you feel like crying, cry, but then you have to continue because it's only you. Yeah, it's a lot of becoming best friends with yourself through and through.
You're the person that has to give yourself the pep talk from time to time. And when it's raining and you decide to put up the tent and it stops, you have to tell yourself, well, it was a good decision at the time, now I keep going. Or forgive yourself for what you might conceive to be the wrong decision, conversely as well. I imagine there would have been multiple moments, weather-related aside, where you've had those conversations with yourself too. And I guess also dealing with the perceptions of others. I've had this conversation with a few other previous female guests who've also done solo tours as well, and the perceptions from other people who see you on the road to also just how we're raised to expect that things are dangerous for us and we shouldn't be trying these things, and wow, aren't we so brave? I guess you would have had the experiences of people, their perceptions of that as well. I think I remember seeing, don't know whether it was a post on your cycle tour you were talking about this, where how you've learnt to answer the question of are you on your own as well. Do you want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so the first question is always, where are you from? Because people have no idea where you're from and what you're doing. Second question, when I'm 4 continents that I traveled by bike by myself, was, are you alone? And they say it with a certain either intrigue or, are you alone? As in like, I'm really looking out for you here. Like, why are you alone? Why are you doing this? And depending on who asks, I always say that, depending on who asks and what your gut feeling is, what your instinct is, I would answer one of 2 ways. So let's start with the first one that's a little bit sad because you end up putting a wall in front of you. You approach it in a guilty until proven innocent mindset. And that's really sad to say, but as a solo female cyclist, sometimes you have to, most of the time actually, you have to go that route of, why are you saying that? Are you alone? With some intrigue and curiosity. I think I need to maybe say that my partner is right behind me, or there's a group ahead of me, or no, I'm not alone. No is the answer to that approach. And the other approach is to kind of, when you understand the audience and you think that maybe let's say it's a woman who is like, are you alone? Are you okay? In that case, especially if there's a young girl with her, I try to take the approach of, you know what? I am alone and it's okay because I'm strong, I'm brave, I can do this. And especially with young girls, I try to tell them, you know what? You can do this too. But you have to be prepared. You have to do your research. You have to be smart. You have to be aware. And then, yes, it's okay to do things alone. It's actually really healthy, and I encourage it. And I think everyone should do these things alone, whether it's just an hour on your own a day or it's a huge multi-year bike ride. I think that solo journeys are something that we should encourage more because they're so good for us. We have so many breakthroughs. We are able to meet so many people and experience such a different level of thinking on our own. So those are the two approaches I take. I would love to say that I say, yes, I'm alone to a lot more people, and I try and inspire and impact more people to go alone. But that's sadly not the case. Usually I play it safe and say, no, there are people around me.
I guess on that point, McKenzie, do you think you could have gone and done what you did in those environments in South America straight away after doing Vietnam, had you not had the experience through Europe and then the experience through South Africa, New Zealand, Australia? Do you think you could have jumped from one to the other, or do you feel that the culmination of that experience allowed you that confidence and preparation to take on that last part of your trip?
I wouldn't change one bit of each level I had to progress in so many ways to get from Vietnam to South America. And just speaking, let's say tangibly, let's say materialistically, my bike approach changed so much. I had a used bike and ended up selling it in Vietnam. Then in Europe and Africa, I had a Surly disc trucker with a classic touring rear pannier setup. Then when it came time for New Zealand and Australia, I wanted to go more lightweight with a bike packing approach. So I got a Kona Sutra LTD, which is basically a mix between a gravel bike and a touring bike. And I was able to put bigger tires on that, attach bags to the frame itself. As everyone knows, that's kind of that bike packing approach, and go a lot more minimalist with my gear. From New Zealand and Australia, I learned that I could go minimalist, but I necessarily wouldn't want to in South America because I had more gear. I wanted to bring more layers for the cold weather, and it was more remote. From New Zealand and Australia, I then changed my gear setup one more time for South America, and I got what I feel like is my most dialed in gear approach I took with me in South America. And that was with, instead of a rear rack situation or a saddle bag, I went with a tail fin setup. Yeah, that's a really cool new kind of Aeropack rack with these mini panniers. And then I had a very lightweight bike packing approach combined with that. So that's just from a bike setup standpoint, all of the different levels of learning I had to go through. And that's not even including how I changed as a person. As we've spoken about, you're different after every single trip. And each of these trips was a monumental journey, usually down an entire country or an entire continent. I experienced new cultures. I experienced how I would adapt to and be resilient with different problems. And I think I could have, of course, gone from Vietnam to South America, but I wouldn't be where I am at today in terms of this accumulation of, hopefully, of wisdom. We'll see how it goes. But this accumulation of wisdom and this world perspective of these different steps, chapters, layers I had to go through in order to get to where I am today.
Oh, I fully respect that answer. We talk about these tours and the word experience, and the word experience is in what you have experienced, but also the word experience leads to other things. And mastery, I don't know that that's, I keep saying I don't know that that's the right word, but it's actually the word that comes to mind, is because you've had so much, you can draw on that mental bank deposit when you need to. Times go tough. I know how to deal with that scenario. And perhaps it was a case, of course you could have done what you did in South America straight from Vietnam. You're physically capable, and I believe you would have been mentally capable as well. But perhaps the things that you decided to take on in South America would have been different. And maybe you allowed yourself to take a tougher route, take a tougher challenge, endure different weather, and have a different approach. So I think that's probably part of it as well. We've jumped so much on this chat because you've gone so many places. I could seriously dedicate a podcast to probably each country or continent or tour, and maybe one day we'll come back and we'll say, let's just dissect this Bolivia. But I actually want to go back to something. I want to know about your experiences with wildlife, and that might sound silly. I mean, you spoke momentarily earlier about almost being stampeded by an elephant, not an insignificant scenario, but elephants are one thing. I have this vision that through South America, you would have come across your fair share of llamas. In Africa, there might have also been camels. In Australia, definitely you would have come across kangaroos. I want to know, what's your overwhelming experience been with animals and wildlife?
Well, it's as if you were there right with me, because that's exactly it. Look, in Africa, I had no idea that the world had so many camels, and it was definitely the most popular animal that we would come across. Camels everywhere from top to bottom, essentially. And then in Botswana, that is the one that sticks out. When you say wildlife experience, wildlife encounters, so when you cross into Botswana, we crossed in from Zambia, Zimbabwe, near the Victoria Falls, you cut in and you immediately are in what's called the Elephant Highway. And this is one of the largest concentrations of wild African elephants in the world. And so they're wild. So we cross the border, we start biking, and all of a sudden we see this massive gray boulder. Like, oh gosh, what's that? It's kind of a roadblock. Well, it turns out it was a family of elephants. So they're everywhere. And you usually want to see them first before they see you, because then you can make the decision of if you stop and give them their space. They're massive creatures, so you don't want to disrupt them. They're also beautiful creatures. So when you come across a family, it's fine. When you come across a lone male in heat, we were specifically warned about that, because they will charge you. And luckily, when one charged us, my partner James was ahead of me at this time. He came straight out of the African bush, out of nowhere, and started to dart towards us. And it was a mock charge. So he basically stopped, 10, 20 feet before charging us, which was heart in the stomach, completely just in shock. And the way you actually avoid disturbing elephants on the Elephant Highway is, if there's a family or if there's an elephant that you kind of don't want to piss off, you wait for a car to come alongside the road and you go along with them, because elephants and most animals that we encountered on by bike, they don't know what to make of bicycles, which is really interesting. They don't know if you're another animal or if you're a threat. So they get very spooked by it and they might end up charging you. So we would oftentimes wait for a car to almost disguise us as if we were a car. So for instance, in like safaris, that is why in safaris and wildlife national parks, they actually keep everyone inside the car. Do not separate yourself from the car, because you're a structure, and the animal recognizes you as a structure. But the second you walk away from that car or get on a bike away from that car, they don't know what you are. So the elephants in Africa really sticks out. That was a formulative experience and encounter, that's for sure. But yes, llamas in South America, they were all over. I'm sure there were pumas. I just didn't see them. I'm sure they saw me. I had a kangaroo actually cross my path. It was a beautiful experience. My first day on the Great Ocean Road in Australia. And then sadly, across the Nullarbor in Australia, which I'm sure you're familiar with, one of the harshest environments on Earth. I had a lot of animal encounters, but they were, sadly not still living because of a lot of truck head-on collisions with them. So wombats, yeah.
You sadly smelt them most often before you saw them for a while as well. It is really sad and sobering when that comes across as well. I'm glad that you had a nice kangaroo experience, because there are moments with kangaroos, and a lot of people who have not experienced them and aren't Australian don't realise that they, as a cyclist, at certain times of the day, they actually can be quite dangerous for you too. They're nocturnal animals, but they don't have great night vision either. So if you have your lights on at night, they are blinded by it, so they don't know what to make of you. You weren't in Australia during magpie season, were you?
I wasn't, thankfully. Yeah, didn't have to put the zip ties on my helmet.
They don't work anyway, so don't waste your time. Don't waste your zip ties. Keep them for if something breaks on your bike. But that's actually another example of where a bird doesn't know what to make of you on a bike. And often the thing to do with an aggressive magpie is to actually get off a bike. Similar to what I've been told to do with an aggressive dog is to get off that as well. Oh, gosh.
That actually brings up a great point. The one that I didn't mention, but is one of the downsides. There are so many beautiful reasons to go to South America, to go to your Peru, your Bolivia, to experience those countries in the Andes by bicycle. But sadly, one of the realities of it is that they have very bad dog situation with cyclists. Dogs don't know what bikes are, and they do the same thing with like scooters or motorcycles or wheels in general. A lot of the farm dogs actually will be overly protective, and they can be quite vicious. I met a number of cyclists who actually got bit by dogs in Peru. So that is something worth noting.
What was your strategy then? Like, is it getting off the bike? Did you have a strategy or?
I absolutely did. I was pretty dialed in. I have like Rafa chamois, if you're aware of those, with the pocket. So in those pockets, I always had rocks. And the reason was I love animals, I love wildlife, and I don't want to harm any living thing. However, when you take a rock out of your pocket and you pretend to throw it, dogs will actually retreat by just potentially being hit with a thrown rock. So I didn't end up throwing too many. Only when I felt like it was life-threatening or they were actually going to come and bite me did I throw rocks. So that was kind of the first step. Always have rocks in my pocket. And I would always dismount, which is a debate in the cyclist community. Do you dismount or do you just try and keep cycling? Even on fast descents, it was awful to have to stop the progress, but I would stop my bike, act big, and dismount and start yelling. No matter how embarrassing it is and people were around, you become the alpha. You show that you have rocks in your pocket and might throw it, and that dog will retreat. So I never, knock on wood, was bit by a dog and never had any too close of encounters with it, but that's my strategy.
Yeah, and I've heard that strategy from a number of people as well. It's funny, people often say a squirt with the water bottle is really effective too. Never have I ever thought to do it. But also I'm guessing just it's a scenario, again, a case where you have thought about something or you've experienced it, so now you know how to react to it. It's something else that you're bringing along with your trip too. And I'm really glad that you weren't unfortunate enough to be bitten there either, because then dealing with the complexities of potential rabies and rabies shots and stuff in remote Peru or wherever you are isn't a scenario you want to be thinking about on your monumental bike tour. I realize we've been talking for ages. We will have to wrap this up soon, but I do have a question. And it's funny, sometimes I think these questions, it's not that they're artificial, but with all the experiences, it's like, really, I'm asking this, but I'm going to. And all I've got here, it's not even a question. It's just wild camping views. Just floor me with the first or one or two that first come to mind, because you must have had hundreds of them, no doubt. But I just want to know, if you had to manufacture somebody the most epic wild camping view from your experience, what would that be?
Okay, two come to mind without thinking too hard. One of the fresh experiences is, that was Peru Great Divide, South America. And like I said, it's one of the most illustrious dirt touring routes in the world for a reason. And this was just overlooking some beautiful glacier high alpine lakes, completely alone with mountains in the background. And I had just dodged what would have been a snowstorm. So I was in heaven and set up my tent site with this beautiful vista. I have some great photos of it. And I go to cook and all of a sudden I hear some noises. I'm like, oh no, I've been found out, because that's what you don't want. You always dip off the road to wild camp so that no one sees you. And I was like, man, my spot's been found out. I might have to pack up and move. And I opened my tent vestibule to probably 20 cattle that just made that grass patch, that beautiful vista, beautiful grass patch, their bathroom for the rest of the night. So that was pretty funny and kind of like well, what did you expect? It's like, I always call it's the universe laughing at you. It's not, you have this dream, this expectation of this gorgeous wild camping vista. And then some cows decide to make it their bathroom for the entire night.
It's like when people joke and you say Instagram v reality. So
Exactly.
Instagram is this amazing view, and maybe you've got the quintessential cow just posing, and reality is it's the amazing view with 10 cows all taking a dump.
Exactly. No, you're exactly right. It's hilarious how real life it all is. Yeah, it's Instagram versus reality to a T. So probably the second one that comes to mind, and we have been speaking a lot about Sudan, but for a good reason. I just really enjoyed cycling that country. Was a beautiful Saharan desert wild camp, and that was funny enough. Actually, the night that we did not know about the situation. So we thought it was this dreamland, we're in the Saharan desert. It's this beautiful vista. We're in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, it's something out of a dream. And then you come to find out the next day that actually you are in the real world, and you're in the middle of a military coup in a very fragile political situation. So it was a reality check for sure. So I think if there's anything to take away from those two experiences, it's that nothing is perfect. No camp spot is perfect. And you have to find the beauty in all the little imperfections and just take it as it comes.
Definitely. Only someone who's traveled with the depth of that experience can come out with something like that as well, I feel. Well, genuinely anyway. Finishing in Colombia, finishing with the best coffee in the world, probably. Yay to coffee. Bella is a coffee lover. Everyone in the podcast should know that by now. And I say finishing, like obviously you reach, that's that milestone, 29,000 kilometers. You cycled the world. You chose the way to do it, intention and purpose, and drew from it so many experiences. How does it feel now, just a few weeks after finishing that, sitting with that now, that monumental thing has occurred? You're still processing it?
I'm absolutely still in processing mode. I think something worth noting is at the end of a monumental, multi-year, 29,000 kilometer, 5-continent, mostly solo world cycle by your own human power, there is no trophy at the finish line. There's no grand celebration. There's no media. There's no, there was no one but yourself. And that's essentially who you do that for in the first place. So don't let your ego blow things out of proportion. At the end of the day, this is something I would have done if I didn't tell anyone about it. And I think that's the most important thing, is I did this for me. And if no one knew about it, I would be really proud of myself. And of course I have my loved ones calling me and wishing me congratulations. And there is that element of it's done, it's over, you've reached the finish line. But I think it was actually perfect how I ended it. And it was just me in the coffee capital with delicious coffee. But no, just me at the end, kind of just how I started it. And I think that was the whole point of this, was this inner revolution.
I literally got goosebumps. I know the word literally gets used when something literally doesn't happen, but I literally got goosebumps hearing you say how you did it for yourself. That whole experience, that's why it needed to be done. It didn't need to be shared. I did it for me, and it was my experience, and that was, I love this so much. I always joke, whenever I interview a guest, I always finish an interview just wanting to get on my bike and go places, or just go for a hike or something like that as well. So you're definitely inspiring me, and I know that you'll definitely be inspiring others as well, McKenzie. It's just brilliant. So if people do want to be inspired by you and actually dig into so much of the detail that sadly we have not dug into whatsoever, how can they find you online, and what's the best way of them to find out more about your story?
So for up-to-date information, it's McKenzie Barney. That's my Instagram. So McKenzie Barney. That's my Instagram for up-to-date info. I also have a website with all of my expeditions, through hiking and bikepacking/bike touring, as well as I'm a writer and a filmmaker. And on that note, I'm working on a lot of writing publications, potentially a book and a film of this journey. So hopefully you can get a lot of those updates through my Instagram and on my website. But yeah, I'm very honored, and that really means a lot, because I think that a journey like this is, essentially it is for self-development. However, I've found that I don't know about you, seek women explorers, authors, explore speeches. I'm a huge fan of Lael Wilcox, the cyclist, but I'm also a huge fan of Robin Davidson, who took camels across the Australian desert solo, of Liz Clark, who sails the world solo, and all these, your Amelia Earharts, sure, your Isabella Birds, your old explorers, but also the new explorers. And I really get a lot of fuel out of hearing from women's perspectives on big journeys. And I found that I feel like I owe it to the world, because I've gotten so much inspiration from them, to maybe add a little bit to that pool of knowledge from what I've experienced. And if I just influence one young girl to go out there and have the courage to travel the world by herself in whatever way she sees fit, then I think it's worth it to share. Otherwise, I wouldn't share. It's just another trip. It's just another journey, and we all have dreams, and this dream was calling to me, so I followed it.
Oh, I love it. You're definitely inspiring, and you haven't added a little bit of inspiration. You added a lot with so much of yours. I'm gleefully going to be adding links to everything for you in the show notes here, and I will certainly be keeping an eye out for your book, your movie, everything. I absolutely love it, McKenzie. I just love the purpose and intention that you speak with and reflect back on as well. And you've crossed your finish line on this trip, for lack of a better word. It hasn't really ended, because I'm speaking for you, and I shouldn't be, but my feel is that there are moments every day, and that will probably happen for the rest of your life, where this trip continues through memory. So I think that's brilliant as well. Okay, I do need to wrap things up. There's 2 questions left. I ask them of all my guests. They're pretty short, sharp, and easy. I'm not 100% sure if I know the answers to both of them, which is a change for once, but I'm going to ask them. So the first one is, when given the choice of having to cycle continuously up a constant hill climb, or having to cycle into a constant headwind for a whole day, which one are you going to choose?
I'm going with the hill climb on this one. And the reason I've taken so long to decipher is because I have had the headwind on the Nullarbor across Australia, and it is excruciating. Your progress dials down to maybe a fourth of what you want it to be if you're lucky. Yeah, and you get dehydrated. That's the other thing. So you have to bring twice as much water when you have a constant headwind. On the hill climb, I think you can just power through. You put some loud music in, get into a mental headspace where you just know that at the end of the day, this is just a hill climb, and a lot of other people face a lot harder things in life.
You're talking about loud music. What's a song that you would put on? What's a song that's always going to be on your playlist?
That is such a good question, because there's so many. Okay, I'll say this one because it's pretty relative to what I try to become. I'll go with Alicia Keys' Girl on Fire. I'm going to go with that one.
Oh, brilliant. I'm going to add it to my playlist. That's great. That's great. Maybe we need to create one, actually. I'll ask all my guests, and at the end of the season, I'll put out a Seek Travel Ride playlist for people.
I would absolutely love that. Please do it.
Done. Tick. Okay. Last question. You have been given the task that you're going to be cycling for 4 hours one day, which I realize for a world traveler is not much time, but it's 4 hours. You have the choice to cycle on your own or with another person. Which one would you choose?
It's probably going to be surprising after this whole chat, but with another person, because, well, first of all, I've just experienced a lot on my own. And second of all, I really prefer sharing experiences with other people. So then you have the opportunity of, if you pass a cool looking cafe, you can stop and have a chat and enjoy your coffee with that other person. And also, that would give me the opportunity to tell you who that other person gets to be. And maybe I get to pick someone from history or someone that I get to ask questions. So I'm going to go with cycling with another person for 4 hours.
Oh, I love that response. I love that response. My gosh, McKenzie, they are all of my questions. I guess, to be fair, I do have one more, and that is, what's a question I didn't ask you that maybe I should have asked you?
Well, I would say that I have to compliment you. You are an incredible interviewer, and this has been an absolute pleasure. So your questions are just, talk about well prepared. I mean, this has been an absolute joy. So thank you for looking into so much of my journey and asking incredible questions. This has been so much fun. I would say I can't think of any question you didn't ask, but I would love to mention that I think one of my perspectives on life is that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, ever. It's something I try to live by. There's been a lot of chapters in my life, and I hope that by continuing to turn the chapters into something new, into some brand new challenge where you have to start from the beginning and fly into Vietnam and buy a bike and figure it out. Go on your very first thru hike with no idea if you can make it 5 months and emerge from the wilderness at the end of the trail. I do think that it's never too late to reinvent yourself, and this life is fragile and precious and beautiful. We should give it everything we have, and any sort of, inclination for wanting to try something new, I would say just start and do it.
I love it. I love it. McKenzie Barney, it has been an absolute pleasure to share time with you. I know we've been speaking for ages, but in the moment, it's just felt like I'd love to have a campfire chat with you. In fact, open invitation, come to the Pyrenees. I will take you up climbs where I know you'll have a tailwind, and you can cycle with me for 4 hours at least. That would be an absolute pleasure. Thank you so, so much.
Thank you. And I will take you up on that.
Wow, I don't know about you, but listening to McKenzie talk about her experiences there on the many different adventures that she's had, both on her bicycle and also earlier on with her thru hikes, it's really got me excited about future adventures for myself. I'll also certainly be keeping an eye on McKenzie and seeing what's in store for her, because I don't think that someone who travels in this way can put an end to any type of adventures. I feel there will be more travels, whether by foot or by bicycle, with McKenzie to come. And I thank her for sharing her story with our listeners here as a guest of the podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast, please make sure to follow us in your podcast player. That way you'll be notified when new episodes land. And be sure to tell your family and friends about the show as well. Spreading word like that really helps the show to grow and reach a wider audience. If you've got your own adventure on a bicycle story that you would like to share with our listeners, please get in touch with me. Send an email, podcast@seektravelride.com, and you can find out about how you can be interviewed as a guest for the show. Until the next episode, I'm Bella Malloy. Thanks for listening.